Welcome back to Switch Stars and welcome back to another review, where today on the channel we're checking out Saga of the Moon Priestess, a new top-down adventure game and a throwback to the classic Zelda games of the 80s and 90s. A Link to the Past has always been my favourite Zelda game of all time, but does this one come anywhere close to that masterpiece, and should you be dropping the cash on it? Like, subscribe for more Switch content, and let's find out. So the story in Moon Priestess opens with a short introductory section as we awaken as a young prince, discover the castle has been broken into by some ne'er-do-gooders, and eventually encounter a nameless baddie who, after abducting the king, proceeds to abduct us too. Following this, we get a short wall of text which, like the rest of the game's dialogue, I found a little difficult to read due to the font selection. But this explains that we're now focusing in on a young girl called Sarissa, who, armed with a sharpened spear and the ability to communicate with the moon goddess, sets off on an adventure, and this is our character for the game. Now this is pretty much where the story elements finish, apart from the end of the game of course, and while there are a few lines of dialogue to be had from the various characters that you meet, unlike the Zelda games which utilise the narrative to direct you on a path through the game, Moon Priestess simply sends you on your way and lets you muddle through things on your own. From the get-go though, we're dropped into the world and given no direction on where to go or what to do, but progressing is mainly linear, so it's not too difficult to work things out, and if you do get stuck you can consult the village psychic who, much like the old man in Link's Awakening, will drop you a hint on where to go. After working our way through a short forest section, we then encounter a strong man who has lost his power glove and a village where we can buy a few supplies and chat to random residents who have very little to say of interest, but everything points us towards the first main dungeon of the game and the retrieval of that power glove. Now, the game's controls are relatively simple and very much on par with most of the classic Zelda games. We move around with the D-pad or thumbstick, can attack using our spear with a push of the X button, and interact with our surroundings with the A button, and for the most part they work fine. However, I did find the movement in the game to be rather slow, made even slower by the annoying patches of grass. But my biggest issue was with the spear weapon, which only attacks directly ahead of us, unlike your classic sword which usually attacks in an arc, which would have been fine had the game used 4-directional movement like the original Zelda games, but it uses omnidirectional like modern top-downs, which does make it a pain in the ass to actually hit enemies sometimes. Once we acquire some equipables though, we can then use these with the B button as both utility items in combat and to solve puzzles with. But as you'll soon discover, like the rest of the game, there's very little in the way of originality with them. The standard Zelda lineup of a strength glove allowing you to pick up heavier objects, bombs which can blow holes in brittle walls, and a bow and arrows, and a fire staff. And the most original of these is undoubtedly the hookshot-like item, which instead of pulling you across the screen, switches your position with the blocks that it latches onto. Like I said though, the game is mostly a linear affair and these items are mainly used for progression to open up new routes which were previously inaccessible, and you'll be working your way back and forth through the world to conquer its various dungeons. Now, the enemy variety is pretty decent, though again, nothing really in the way of originality here, and if you've played a Zelda game you'll no doubt be able to identify the counterparts. But they're a mixture of ranged and melee enemies, a couple of which require certain tactics to defeat, but most of which just take a few spear attacks to be rid of. When it comes to the dungeons, in all honesty, they're not too bad. Each is located in its own little biome, which does help with remembering where you need to go, and the dungeons themselves are your standard setup of working your way through them, solving puzzles and defeating enemies to obtain key equipables, and then hunting down a big key to open up the way to the boss. For the most part, they're pretty well put together, though there is quite a lot of backing and forthing through them, and there's no way to teleport to the entrance other than dying. The puzzles themselves are relatively simple, though well put together, bar a couple of them which were ill thought out in my opinion, like this one which requires you to follow a long walking pattern which is only actually viewable while reading this sign, but I can't say that I really struggled to actually solve any of them. My key gripe with the dungeons though has to come from the bosses themselves, which, whilst all having unique mechanics for you to contend with and being quite varied, aren't all that challenging, usually requiring you to utilise one of your newfound equipables. But in fact, you don't actually need to kill them at all, as the only thing they actually drop is a health upgrade and they don't actually progress the storyline in any way, so you can just snag the equipable and move on to the next dungeon if you're good enough at avoiding hits. Aside from the main dungeons though, there are also a couple of optional ones for you to discover, which first require you to have obtained most of the equipables in order to progress through them, and alongside a few secrets, these offer an additional hour of gameplay or so, and a few additional items to collect. All in all though, while the gameplay in Moon Priestess is relatively solid, like I said, there's very little in the way of originality and it's very much a cookie cutter Zelda clone, and it's a real shame that they didn't think more about the storyline and at least make an attempt to incorporate it into the game in some way, rather than have you wandering from dungeon to dungeon without any kind of narrative progression. That's not to say that the game itself isn't enjoyable though. I had a fun enough time playing it, it's just that it didn't have any real depth in terms of its storyline, and the gameplay didn't really do anything that I hadn't seen done many times before. And while I did have my frustrations, such as repeatedly having to enter my inventory to switch out equipables and a couple of the boss battles which completely bugged out, for the most part it's a pretty decent adventure game, and one that Zelda fans should find to their liking. Lastly, I also want to touch on the visuals and audio, which are not too bad in my opinion. They're kind of a mixture between the original Zelda, having that 8-bit vibe to them, and a Zelda Link to the Past, with some very similar sprites on display, such as trees, cabbages and a few of the enemies. But all in all, not too bad, and the music and sound effects are okay too, having that familiar retro vibe to them. If you enjoy Zelda-Likes though, I'd say that it's well worth giving a go. It's reasonably priced at just over $5 and a decent little clone, all things considered. With that said though, is Moon Priestess one that you'll be picking up or one that you'll be giving a miss? Let me know down in the comments section below, drop a like and subscribe for more Switch content, and as always, thanks to the patrons of the channel for their ongoing support and to you the viewers for watching. But until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.